Hey guys, strap in. We've got 68 slides to get through, so I'll try to be very quick through this. Pardon me for reading some of these. There's some things, I'm going to try and not go down rabbit holes today, but there's some things that I really want to make sure I cover. So the title is really broad, but I wanted to spend a little while talking about how we see at Komodo IoT evolving, the threats that we're seeing, and hopefully give some thoughts or some actionable recommendations on maybe what we could do or how we could think differently. So today, we're going to talk about a few things. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of, in fact, put your hands up if you've heard of xIoT, another terrible acronym. Okay, so hopefully I'm introducing some people that don't know what it is, so that's good. We'll cover areas around sort of some of the problems that we see in xIoT, activity that we're seeing sort of on sort of in the wider world, but also in underground marketplaces, and also sort of how we see nation states acting at the moment. And when we think about sort of everything that's going on in the physical world right now, there is always a knock-on in terms of cyber warfare, where IoT is actually becoming much more prolific and making that attack surface much more of a appetizing place for attackers to put their gaze on. And then I'll touch on compliance and regulation. There are people here that will be much better at talking about regulation and compliance, but there's a few things that I wanted to point out and some thoughts on how I see that going at the moment. And then we'll end off with any questions, and I'll talk about some of the recommendations as well. So a little bit about me, why I'm stood here. Toby Wilmington, CEO and one of the co-founders of Komodo. Actually, the whole founding team were all ex-NATO BAE Systems, so we've been building detection and prevention capabilities for quite a while now. When we say most targeted networks, anywhere from sort of like enterprise to sort of secret networks and battlefield systems as well. So we've got some really interesting sort of commodity sort of cyber criminals that might be targeting us, but also the sort of some of the common nation states that you may think of as well with sort of advanced tools and techniques. A lot of the content that you'll see today, in fact, let me go back to that. The reason why the drums are on there, I'm a failed musician. So I don't know if we've got any musicians in the room. So I've always just been really interested in cybersecurity and computers, breaking stuff, trying to make things do what they're not supposed to do. But all I ever wanted to be, maybe that's why I've got tattoos, is just to be a rock star. And I'm also a qualified barber. So just a random fact. So most of the stuff that you see today, or some of it at least, is actually available in this white paper that we released this year. So feel free to download that. So what is IoT? So NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, I think they're with us today actually, they describe IoT as technologies that interact directly between the physical world and the digital world. So what that actually means to us is essentially the expansion of technologies. I kind of like to simplify it even more and say not laptops and not servers, maybe not mobile phones as well. Things that we can't apply the common sort of cybersecurity approaches that we might do to, say, enterprise technologies. So it could be anything from SCADA, industrial systems, to medical devices, and we'll kind of touch a little bit on that as well. But all of these things essentially introduce more connectivity to, I always mention sensitive networks or critical industries. I don't necessarily mean critical national infrastructure. I don't necessarily mean secret networks. Anywhere that could introduce some sort of business or even physical risk. Right. So we're seeing xIoT, and this is not a comprehensive list, but we're seeing this sort of expand in many different areas, and we've tried to sort of compartmentalize them into different groups. So there's some IoT devices or sort of Internet of Things devices that you guys are all sort of aware of, right? It could be anywhere from IP cameras that you could have outside a house, right, or a consumer device. But those IP cameras are also used in military bases across the world as well. We've got EV chargers. They're increasingly becoming ever connected through different ways. We're seeing now even automotive, commercial vehicle, EV truck company that we work with, they're actually opening up signals coming outside of the cab now to enable payments, essentially, so the driver doesn't have to get out of the cab. And when they have, some of these trucks can now do 600 to 900 miles when they're combining different fuel types. The EV charging attack surface is also growing as well, and these are all connected to the grid, right? So I'm going to try and not push a bunch of fear and uncertainty and doubt, but if you start to see all of these things, it's just a car or it's a truck, and then it connects to an EV charger, and an EV charger is connected to the grid, and the grid is what's powering today. There's a lot of things in the supply chain, a lot of places where there's not a standardized approach in securing all of those things from end to end. Industrial sensors, pumps, robotics, all of these things that sort of speed up manufacturing and time to market. We're starting to see, actually, I saw Siemens, I think last year or the year before, introduced a cloud-based PLC. Hands up if you work in industrial control systems. Okay, so you'll know PLCs. I was speaking to someone a couple of months ago, and they said, if I over my dead body would I put my PLC on in the cloud? But companies don't create these technologies for no reason, right? So there must be a requirement there, and we're seeing the same thing. Medical devices, we want to understand and be able to remove people from risk, right? Whether that's taking an X-ray. That could even be sort of in defense as well, right? You want to have unmanned systems, right, where you don't want to put a human in the loop. And all of these things require connectivity and therefore become an xIoT device. So I won't push too much more on this, but just some applications here, I think. So I'm not going to talk through all of these. I think the slides will be provided after this, so feel free to take a read through it. But we're seeing the attack surface of many different industries that we would constitute as critical, introducing more connected technologies, more IoT devices or xIoT devices, whether that's indirect or direct connectivity to the internet. We're seeing it in energy, where people are looking to reduce costs and actually understand, what's the most efficient ways to produce energy, and also what's the best times that people are actually using that energy. When do we switch over to nuclear, for instance? And the same, if you think about utility, right? There's a bunch of stuff on the news at the moment around sort of polluted waters. There's millions and millions, billions of pounds actually being put into understanding why this is happening, when this is likely to happen, and to be able to respond to that so that the level of chlorine that we have to put in our waters doesn't have to keep increasing, right? And then, of course, military and defense. We don't have to look at what's actually going on in the world at the moment, and we just look at what Ukraine have done. I think they're pushing out 1 million drones in operation every single year at the moment since the war began, and all of those are unmanned. So we're seeing a real change in how we actually, we're not trying to take people out of jobs, but this connectivity is really starting to allow us to take people out of risk and take business risk away from companies as well. So why am I talking about this? So there's a few, again, not an exhaustive list. Some of it's, and actually there's some companies here that apply themselves and sort of solve many of these different problems, but there's common weaknesses that we see in extended Internet of Things devices that stem anywhere from weak authentication, weak passwords. The PSTI bill that came in April sort of worked to get rid of some of that. But a lot of the sort of commercial regulations and compliance self-certified, right? And also, we've got some cybersecurity experts in the room. If I change my password from password, I'm probably going to change it to password 123. And then if I change it from password 123, probably change it to 1234 or a plus. So, just by saying the password can't be default doesn't mean that it's everything's solved. And the most common way, for me as a threat actor, I'm not a threat actor, but putting my hacking sort of hat on, I'm always going to go for the path of least resistance. I'm not going to try and use some sophisticated tools. If I can just get in with a password, and some of you may be aware of tools such as information stealer, malware. Authentication is still the primary access into a device. And that's probably not going to change for a long, long time. So as much as we might try and make these passwords really complex, information stealer malware is really, really advanced now, but the actual capability to actually go and get those passwords, and they come with session cookies as well. So I can actually pretend to be you and get into a device with that authentication already open. It's crazy. The firmware, these systems, there are some commonalities in how they're developed, operating systems that they use, RTOS compiles that happen, but they're all built in different ways, right? And there are systems that are using different, whether it's architecture, some are on an ARM chip, some are on a RISC-V chip. Can you do the same things on each? To be debated. Some people can, some people can't. Communication protocols. We've got a couple of people in the team that are from the IoT industry, but I thought the cybersecurity industry was bad for acronyms. When you get into IoT and you're talking M2M, MQTT, all of these different broker acronyms and communication protocols, it's a little bit broken, right? And then there's just a lack of standardization, right? So we'll put it out there. It's pretty bad, right? This timeline, don't read into all of these. Kind of the key thing that I wanted to go over here was just a few different components. And while not every sort of attack on this timeline is a direct attack against IoT technologies, the point here really is that they're getting closer, these attackers are. The sort of sites and the networks that are being more connected is coming closer and closer to IoT. And with the fact that there's going to be 30 billion of these devices connected, in the few next coming years, it's logical for us to go for the weakest point of access, right? So we'll just talk through a few of those. So Triton, actually this was released by the NCSC back in 2017. They actually targeted Schneider Triconex controllers. They delivered custom payloads. And essentially, what this malware was able to do on these devices was to push read and write functions and query the state of the device, which is pretty advanced, right? And we'll talk a little bit through these shortly and where you can get some of this information from. I think pushing through some of these sort of over the last sort of, say, 3-4 years, we've started to see nation states taking a lot of sort of interest in these. So like Volt Typhoon, sort of Chinese nation state, are finding IoT really useful to actually obfuscate their activities. So in some cases, they're looking to pre-position themselves into critical infrastructure because, and we'll go through this in a second, but some nation states don't actually want to be found, right? So they'll just sit there dormant. But actually, there's ways that we can use this almost as a proxy or a VPN node, right? Pass all this IoT, pass all my data through IoT traffic. Good luck trying to find out who actually stole the data. And over the last several years, we've seen a sharp escalation of attacks, but also malware. 400% increase in malware actually being shared and targeting IoT specifically. I think the key one that I wanted to talk about was this PRC botnet campaign. So we saw Flax Typhoon. They took over 1 million IoT devices. They can isolate it. They can turn it off. They basically encrypt most. I hear a bunch of companies say we encrypt everything. So do the attackers as well. So that encryption is actually good for them because as network defenders, if you're encrypting traffic, it's much harder to detect, right? So in some cases, they like that encryption because network detection doesn't work as efficiently in many cases. And then, of course, just this year, we saw a report come out from October last year, but also just a few weeks ago in a different company, there's multiple routers that were bricked, over 700,000. 600,000 for one of the device manufacturers in October last year, and there was one recently where there's 700,000 small to medium or SOHO routers where the malware just shut them off. Now, a lot of these devices are built secure by design. I think the key thing is we need to think about, okay, that's good, but once something's out in the wild, we have to presume in sort of the security analysis world, we're already breached. So what capabilities do you have to detect that going forward once something's out in the wild? Now, in terms of threat landscape, I'm going to push on quickly, just conscious of time. I think the main things I wanted to talk about here was modern warfare is evolving, right? some of you may go to security conferences quite often, and we start to hear this convergence of sort of physical world and digital world. I think it's quite interesting looking at what's going on in the world right now, and the fact there's almost, it's crossed over further, where you look at how powerful the internet is now to sort of spread mis and disinformation, and actually what happens on the internet can now reflect in the physical world, whereas before it was the other way around. You know, the internet, what you see on the internet was a reflection of what's actually going on in the world. Actually, we see it going both ways now, which is quite interesting. So a couple of things I think quite interesting, probably wrong of me to say quite cool, but very novel, you know, in terms of warfare. So Ukraine, some of you may have seen, they actually captured a Russian drone, and they've captured Russian drones and put malware on it before, which I think is pretty cool, waiting for it to get sent back and plugged into their network, right? But this one was quite interesting because in response to Russia hacking Ukrainian IP cameras and finding bases to understand where to drop payloads, Ukraine did exactly the same to Russia, but captured a drone. And rather than just finding IP cameras that were on the side of a building somewhere, these drones were literally going from military bases. So they understood where to drop the bombs, where the military bases were, just from capturing these drones and getting into them and being able to take the telemetry off there and understand what's there. Another interesting one. So Rockwell, and I'm trying to not bash companies here. It's just more so. This is just out on the internet, right? I can go and find things now that are IoT devices and try to get into them, and probably give some of my team like half an hour, and we'll be into quite a few different devices. That's like, threat actors are way more advanced than we are. But we see things like Rockwell Automation. So there was over 17,000 devices that were just open to be connected to. In fact, they had 7,000 devices that were on Shodan that had a bunch of vulnerabilities on it to exploit. And Rockwell kind of just said, guys, disconnect your devices from the internet, please. But it's just something that's going to happen with devices, right? So finally, none of this is illegible. So key thing is, we think about threat actors in 4 different areas. So we think ones that are cyber criminals. The reason why they do stuff is financial gain. Nation state is usually geopolitical. And then we've got hacktivists, which is attention, but also we're starting to see political as well, sometimes even aligning to nation state. And then insider. Insider, you know, we used to think as like, you know, it's a dodgy person and they want to try and get some information off. It's not. A lot of this is down to misconfiguration, right? But we still, consider that as a threat itself. I'm going to push through this one super quick. Key thing is on this one, cyber criminals, they're looking for quick tools that they can buy on the dark web. We're seeing on Telegram things being distributed where they want to get into, say, for instance, the North Texas Municipal Water District and take those systems down. And the only reason why, I mean, it might seem like very nation-state-like, but it's like these guys will probably pay quite a lot. And you hear a lot about how much ransom has been paid in ransomware attacks. What you don't hear about is all of the stuff that didn't get paid. So if you monitor ransomware extortion sites, it's quite alarming to see the ones that were on there and they're not on there today. So it's not what it's not what actually gets reported. Nation states, these are the 4 main ones. I think I'm not going to go through all of these just in the interest of time. Key thing here is I think Russia have a typical sort of MO, a lot of time around disruption, right? They don't necessarily care about being detected. You know, it's kind of like Mass Effect. You know, what can we do that sort of shows our power? Whereas China, you know, with their strategic goals and the Belt and Road Initiative, we see, you know, in sort of like Volt Typhoon, we've seen them targeting the US critical infrastructure. It's actually about the long game. Intelligence is really, really key to them, and it's a upper hand scenario. And then sort of we've got DPRK down here. A lot of that is financial based, so it's how can we get some more money in the country. And then Iran is very much political, especially with what's going on at the moment. Finally, moving on to regs. I think the main thing that I wanted to point out here is not necessarily all these ones that are on here, but regulations are coming closer and closer now to the device manufacturers themselves. it's not a perfect scenario. It's not there yet. We've seen NIS2 get brought in this week. Most countries are not compliant. It's not actually being brought into local law, right? So it's going to take, like GDPR, a good, 3 years, for that to actually happen. But EU Cyber Resiliency Act just shows that actually compliance is starting to move to the left now. So the scenario that I always give is you've got the customer, the people that use stuff on the right, and we're starting to see these regulations move more to the actual supply chain itself. So it's a lot to go through, and I saw your sign, so I'm going to push through on that. What can be done? The main thing that I wanted to focus, has anyone seen MITRE in bed? No, some of you have. Go and check this. I can't finish all of this off, but this is really key. So in the security world, we use MITRE ATT&CK. It's a common language and a way for us to profile and understand what controls and what risks we actually have within our security stack. And MITRE have just released Embed, which is a really, really good, it's quite introductory. I think it's about 12 months in now, but they're iterating it daily. And it's a really good way to understand what's the actual sort of attack surface and opportunity of the devices that we make. How would a threat actor get in? How would they live off the land? And then what things do I have to actually mitigate these threats? And you're not going to fix everything, but the fact that you understand where the risks are in your device is really, really key. And at least it allows your customers or yourself to manage those device risks as well. So we map very nicely to this. I won't talk about what we do. We're upstairs. Come over and see what we do. Finally, I think secure this ecosystem. Ultimately, enterprise security, it's not perfect, right? But I think that we need to start thinking about in critical networks and enterprise networks, we have certain scenarios and certain security practices that we apply, and we shouldn't let devices just be let off the hook. We should be able to have the same visibility that we have for our laptops and servers. Have a look at Embed. I can't plug that enough. And then finally, zero trust. A lot of companies talk about this at the moment. I think the simplest way I like to think about this is let's just say these devices are, they're already hacked. So operate on the fact that something has potentially already happened. Do you know, or are you going to wait for the average of 200 days to actually detect that? Come and chat to us later on. Hopefully that's useful. Yeah, I don't know if we've got time to take a question. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.